I've always been the kind of man who notices details. Creases in a shirt, the way someone's eyes flicker when they lie, the faint scent of a stranger's cologne lingering in a room. Maybe that's why I didn't miss it when Emily started changing. We'd been married 12 years. A solid stretch of shared mornings, quiet evenings, and the kind of rhythm you fall into when you think you've got life figured out. She was a graphic designer, freelancing from our cozy Seattle home, while I managed a small accounting firm downtown. Routine was our bedrock. Until it wasn't. It began with her phone. She'd always left it lying around, on the kitchen counter, the armrest of the couch, unlocked and unguarded. But one October evening, I noticed she'd started clutching it like a lifeline. She'd tilt the screen away when I walked by, her fingers dancing over it in a way that felt secretive. I asked her once, casually, what she was working on so late. "Just a client thing," she said, her voice too bright, her smile too tight. I let it go. I trusted her. That's what you do when you've built a life together, right? Then came the late nights. She'd say she had deadlines, locking herself in her office with mugs of tea that went cold before she touched them. I'd hear her laughing through the door, soft, intimate chuckles that didn't match the sterile tone of a work call. I told myself it was nothing. Emily wasn't the type to drift. She'd always been my anchor. Dark hair, sharp wit, the kind of woman who could make a grocery list sound like poetry. But the details kept piling up. A new perfume I didn't recognize. A pair of earrings I hadn't bought her. A receipt for a downtown cafe I'd never been to. One night I couldn't sleep. The house was silent except for the hum of the fridge, and I found myself standing outside her office door. I pressed my ear against the wood, holding my breath. Her voice was low, a murmur, but I caught fragments. "Tomorrow? Can't wait. He doesn't know." My stomach twisted. I didn't knock. Couldn't. Instead, I went back to bed, staring at the ceiling until dawn, replaying every moment of our marriage like a man searching for a crack in a dam. The next morning, she kissed me goodbye with lips that felt too warm, too eager, and said she'd be meeting a client for lunch. I nodded, smiled, played the part. But as soon as her car pulled out of the driveway, I grabbed my keys. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe nothing, maybe everything, but I had to know. I had to see the truth in the details I'd been ignoring for weeks. Driving through Seattle's gray streets, I followed her at a distance. Her silver Honda wove through traffic, heading not toward the artsy cafe district she'd mentioned, but to a quiet residential neighborhood on the edge of Capitol Hill. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, as I watched her park outside a sleek modern townhouse. She stepped out, her hair catching the wind, and adjusted her scarf. Red, new, not one I'd seen before. She didn't look like a woman meeting a client. She looked like a woman on a date. I parked 2 blocks away, my heart thudding against my ribs, and watched her climb the steps. The door opened before she knocked, and there he was, tall, broad-shouldered, with a lazy grin I could see even from my vantage point. He pulled her inside, and the door shut behind them. I sat there, engine idling, trying to convince myself I'd misunderstood. Maybe he was a friend, a collaborator, someone harmless. But then I saw her coat, her favorite green one, draped over a chair through the window. She wasn't leaving anytime soon. I don't know how long I sat there, minutes bleeding into an hour, before I got out of the car. My legs felt unsteady, like they belonged to someone else. I crossed the street, keeping low, and edged along the side of the house. The blinds were half open, and through the gap, I saw them. Emily was perched on the edge of a couch, her legs crossed, laughing as he handed her a glass of wine. His hand lingered on hers, and she didn't pull away. Then he leaned in, brushing her hair back, and she tilted her face up to meet him. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a betrayal carved in slow motion. Her fingers curled into his shirt, pulling him closer, and I saw the ease of it, the familiarity. This wasn't the first time. My chest burned, a raw ache spreading like wildfire, but I couldn't look away. I needed every detail, every second of proof, because without it, I might have convinced myself I was wrong. When I finally stumbled back to my car, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely start the engine. I drove home in a daze, the image of them replaying behind my eyes. Her smile, his touch, the way she'd given him what she'd promised me forever. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just sat in our living room, staring at the life we'd built, and felt something harden inside me. She'd come home soon, smelling of him, lying to my face, and I'd let her, for now, because I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. I needed a plan. Emily walked through the door at 6:47 p.m. Her cheeks flushed, her scarf slightly askew. "Sorry I'm late," she said, dropping her bag by the couch. The client meeting ran long, lots of revisions. Her voice was smooth, practiced, but I caught the faint tremble in it, the way her eyes darted to mine and then away. She leaned in to kiss me, and I smelled it. His cologne, woody and sharp, clinging to her like a second skin. I kissed her back, brief and mechanical, tasting the lie on her lips. Dinner was quiet. I cooked chicken with rosemary, her favorite, and watched her pick at it, her fork moving in distracted circles. She talked about her day, spinning a story about a picky client and a logo redesign, but her words felt hollow, a script she hadn't rehearsed enough. I nodded, asked questions, played the doting husband while my mind churned. Every detail of her, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the nervous tap of her foot, screamed guilt, and I hated her for it. That night, she fell asleep beside me, her breathing soft and even, while I lay awake, plotting. Couldn't just leave her, not yet. Divorce was too clean, too easy. She'd betrayed me in a way that demanded more than a signature on a paper. I needed her to feel what I felt, to lose what I'd lost, but worse. And then it hit me, the man. He was the key. If I could unravel him, expose him, destroy him, I could watch her crumble with him. The next day, I called in sick and drove back to the townhouse. I parked across the street, camera in hand, and waited. He emerged at noon, jeans, leather jacket, a coffee cup in one hand. I snapped photos capturing his face, his stride, the way he glanced around like he owned the world. I followed him to a gym, then a bar, then back home, building a map of his life. His name was Ryan Decker. I learned later, digging through public records on my laptop. A freelance photographer, single, 38. Perfectly ordinary except for what he'd taken from me. I started small. I created a fake social media profile, Mark Hayes, aspiring artist, and followed him online. I liked his posts, commented on his photos, waited for him to bite. He did, eventually liking one of my replies. Step 1, get close. Step 2, ruin him. Step 3, let Emily watch it all fall apart. Over the next 2 weeks, I became Mark Hayes. I posted sketches, stolen from obscure corners of the internet, and tagged Ryan in a few, praising his photography. He responded with emojis, then a message. Hey man, love your style. You local? I typed back, Seattle, yeah. Big fan of your work. We chatted about art, light, composition, bullshit I half remembered from Emily's rants over the years. He invited me to a gallery event downtown, and I said yes, my pulse racing. This was my in. At home, Emily grew bolder. She'd leave for meetings without explaining, coming back with excuses that didn't hold water. I stopped asking, letting her think I was blind. She'd sit across from me at breakfast, scrolling her phone, smiling at texts she didn't share. I'd smile back, hiding the storm inside me. She had no idea I was weaving a net around her lover, tightening it with every move. The gallery event was a dimly lit warehouse space, all exposed brick and pretentious chatter. I wore a borrowed blazer, glasses I didn't need, and a fake beard I'd ordered online. Mark Hayes in the flesh. Ryan spotted me by a row of abstract prints and waved me over, his grin wide and unguarded. Mark, right? Glad you made it. He was taller up close, his handshake firm, his voice warm. I hated him more for it. We talked for an hour, art, travel, the Seattle scene. He mentioned a friend he'd been shooting lately, a designer with a killer eye. I knew he meant Emily, but I nodded, feigning interest. She sounds talented, I said, my throat tight. Oh, she is, he replied, his tone dipping into something softer, something possessive. I wanted to smash his face into the wall, but I laughed instead, clapping his shoulder like a buddy. Patience, I told myself. Patience. Before I left, he handed me his card. Let's grab a beer sometime, he said. Definitely. I lied, slipping it into my pocket. Driving home, I felt the first rush of power. I'd infiltrated his world, and he didn't suspect a thing. Emily was asleep when I got back, her phone glowing on the nightstand. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. I was already ahead. The plan took shape over the next month. I met Ryan twice more, once for drinks, once at his studio, each time feeding him bits of Mark Hayes' life. A failed marriage, a love for risk, a hunger for validation. He ate it up, opening up about his own life in return. He talked about Emily once, calling her MS, a nickname I'd never used. She's incredible, he said, swirling his beer. Keeps me on my toes. I smiled, imagining his shock when the ground gave out beneath him. At home, I watched Emily unravel. She grew careless, leaving her laptop open, forgetting to clear her browser history. I found searches for weekend getaways, lingerie sites, a florist downtown. She was planning something big with him, maybe an anniversary of their affair. I let her dig her hole, saying nothing. Meanwhile, I dug into Ryan's past. A disgruntled ex-client had posted about a missed deadline years back, small, but a thread to pull. I tracked the client down, posed as a journalist, and got dirt. Ryan had a temper, a history of burning bridges. Useful. I started planting seeds. I accidentally sent Ryan a link to a fake article I'd mocked up. Photographer caught in a plagiarism scandal. Name redacted. Ever worry about this kind of thing? I texted. He laughed it off, but I saw the crack in his confidence. Next, I hacked an old email account of his, easy enough with the right tools, and found messages from years ago, flirty exchanges with a married woman. Another affair. Pattern. I saved everything. Emily came home one night with a bouquet of lilies, claiming they were from a client. I knew better. Ryan's Instagram had a shot of the same flowers that morning. They're beautiful, I said, my voice steady. She beamed, oblivious. That night, I finalized the first strike. An anonymous tip to a local art blog, hinting at Ryan's unethical practices. I attached a doctored photo, him with the married woman from his emails, timestamped recently. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. Doubt was enough. By morning, the blog post was live. Ryan texted me, panicked. You see this crap? Someone's out to get me. I replied, that's wild, man. You okay? Inside, I was grinning. Emily would see it soon. And when she did, the real game would begin. The blog post hit like a pebble in a still pond. Small at first, but the ripples spread fast. Ryan texted me non-stop that morning, his messages a mix of bravado and desperation. It's lies, Mark. I'll sue the bastards. I played the supportive friend, typing back, that's insane. You've got this. Meanwhile, I watched Emily from the corner of my eye as she scrolled her phone at breakfast. Her face tightened, lips pressing into a thin line. She didn't say a word about it, just sipped her coffee and stared out the window. I knew she'd seen it. Good. By afternoon, the art blog's comment section was buzzing. Anonymous tips, vague accusations, a few jabs from old enemies Ryan didn't even know he had. I'd seeded some of it myself using burner accounts I'd set up weeks ago. He's a hack, one read. Stole my ideas years back, claimed another. None of it was provable, but that wasn't the point. Mud sticks when you throw enough of it. I emailed the blog's editor from a fake address, attaching more doctored photos, Ryan with different women, timestamps fudged to look recent. The editor didn't care about truth, he cared about clicks. Emily left the house around noon, saying she had a work thing. I didn't follow her this time. I didn't need to. I knew she was running to him, probably to comfort him, to plan their next move. Instead, I sat at my desk and pulled up Ryan's client list, scraped from his website and a few careless LinkedIn posts. I started emailing them, posing as a concerned colleague. Thought you should know about this guy's reputation. Check the blog. I kept it subtle, professional, just enough to plant doubt. Within hours, I saw a cancellation notice pop up in his public calendar. some corporate shoot, gone. That night, Emily came home late, her eyes red-rimmed, her scarf twisted like she'd been wringing it. "Rough day?" I asked, stirring a pot of soup I'd made. She nodded, mumbling about a difficult client. I handed her a bowl, watched her eat in silence. She didn't suspect me. Not yet. But I could feel her pulling away, her mind somewhere else. With him. I let the silence stretch, savoring the weight of what she didn't know. I was dismantling her world, piece by piece. Before bed, I checked Ryan's Instagram. He'd posted a cryptic story. "Rough patch, but I'll rise above. Thanks for the support." I smiled. He thought this was a storm he could weather. He had no idea the hurricane was still building. The next phase needed precision. Ryan's career was wobbling, but I wanted it shattered. I dug deeper into his past, cross-referencing names from his old emails with public records. One stood out. A woman named Claire, married when he'd pursued her, now divorced. I found her on a parenting forum, still bitter about her ex and the homewrecker who'd ruined her life. I messaged her as a sympathetic stranger, coaxing out details, dates, places, a hotel receipt she'd kept. She sent me a scan of it, faded but damning. Ryan's name wasn't on it, but the timeline matched. I wove Claire's story into the narrative. I sent an updated tip to the blog, attaching the receipt and a blurred photo of Ryan from her era, hinting at a pattern. He preys on married women. This isn't new. The post went up that evening, titled, "Seattle Photographer's Dirty Secret." By morning, it had spread, shared on X, debated in local art groups. Ryan's phone must have been blowing up, because he didn't text me all day. I pictured him pacing, sweating, trying to explain it away. Emily was a ghost that week. She barely spoke, her eyes glued to her screen, her fingers trembling when she thought I wasn't looking. She canceled dinner with friends, claiming a headache, but I heard her whispering on the phone in her office late at night. "What do we do? How did this happen?" I stood outside the door, ear pressed to the wood, and felt a thrill. She was scared. She should be. I escalated. Using Claire's intel, I tracked down her ex-husband, a gruff contractor named Paul. I met him at a dive bar, posing as a private investigator hired by another victim. Paul didn't need much convincing. His hatred for Ryan was a live wire. "That scum ruined my marriage," he growled, downing a beer. I handed him a folder, fake texts I'd fabricated, showing Ryan bragging about Claire and another wife he'd snagged recently. Paul's face darkened. "I'll bury him," he said. I didn't care how. I just needed him in the game. That night, I cooked Emily's favorite pasta, watching her push it around her plate. "You okay?" I asked, my tone soft. She nodded, but her eyes were glassy. "Just tired," she whispered. I reached for her hand, felt her flinch. She didn't know I was the architect of her misery, but she felt the walls closing in. And I wasn't done. Paul didn't waste time. 2 days later, I saw the first sign of his wrath. Ryan's car, a black Jeep he loved posting about, sat in his driveway with its tires slashed and cheater scratched into the hood. I drove by, snapping a photo from my car, and sent it to the blog anonymously. "Looks like someone's not happy." The post went viral in the Seattle scene, speculation swirling. Ryan's Instagram went silent, his last post buried under comments. Some sympathetic, most vicious. Emily unraveled faster. She stopped pretending everything was fine, pacing the house with her phone pressed to her ear, muttering about fixing this. I caught snippets. "They're lying, Ree. We'll figure it out. Ree." The nickname clawed at me, but I kept my mask on. I brewed her tea, asked about her day, let her think I was clueless. Her lies grew sloppy. She said she'd been at a client's, but her coat smelled of his cologne again, and her shoes had mud from his street. I turned up the heat. I hacked into Ryan's cloud storage, his passwords were predictable, Shutterbug77, and found a goldmine, photos of Emily. Dozens of them, candid and intimate, taken in his townhouse, a hotel, a park. Her smile in those shots, wide, unguarded, cut deeper than anything else. I didn't delete them. I downloaded them, then uploaded a few to a sleazy forum, timestamped and geotagged to his address. Local Fatig's latest conquest. I captioned it. Within hours, the link was circulating on X, tied to his name. The fallout was immediate. Ryan's biggest client, a boutique ad agency, dropped him publicly, citing reputational concerns. His online portfolio got flooded with one-star reviews, some real, some from my fake accounts. Emily came home that night looking like she'd been hit by a truck, pale, trembling, her scarf missing. "I need to tell you something," she started, her voice breaking. I braced myself, ready for her confession, but she stopped, shaking her head. "Never mind," she whispered, retreating to her office. I didn't push. I didn't need to. The trap was set, and she was walking right into it. Paul called me later, slurring his words. Smashed his camera too. "He's done." I thanked him, hung up, and poured myself a whiskey. One more push and Ryan would be a shell. Then I'd turn the blade on her. The photos on the forum exploded. By morning, they'd been screen-grabbed, shared, dissected. Emily's face blurred by some, left clear by others. Her name wasn't out there yet, but Ryan's was, tied to every pixel. His phone number leaked next, scraped from an old listing, and the harassment began. Texts, calls, voicemails from strangers calling him every name under the sun. I monitored it all from my laptop, a shadow in my own house, while Emily locked herself in her office, crying behind the door. She didn't come to bed that night. I found her asleep on the couch at dawn, her phone dead beside her, mascara streaking her cheeks. I picked it up, plugged it in, and waited. When it powered on, the screen lit up with missed calls. Ryan, Ryan, Ryan. I didn't unlock it. I didn't need to. The truth was in her ruin. She woke up an hour later, flinching when she saw me watching her. "I'm not feeling well," she said, avoiding my eyes. "Take the day," I replied, my voice steady. She nodded, retreating upstairs. Ryan's world kept burning. Paul had escalated. His Jeep wasn't just vandalized now. It was towed after someone reported it abandoned. His landlord, spooked by the growing chaos, served him an eviction notice. I saw the email in his hacked inbox. I added fuel, tipping off a tabloid-style site with a scorned husband's revenge angle, feeding them Paul's story and hinting at more victims. They ran it, sloppy and sensational, and it hit X like wildfire. Ryan's name trended locally, a punching bag for every troll with a keyboard. Emily slipped out that afternoon, saying she needed air. I let her go, tracking her phone's location, a trick I'd learned weeks ago. She went straight to his townhouse, where moving boxes were already piling up outside. I pictured her there, holding him, promising they'd get through this. The thought fueled me. I called a locksmith, scheduled a security upgrade for our house, and had every lock changed while she was gone. She'd come back to a key that didn't work, a small taste of what was coming. When she returned, banging on the door, I opened it with a frown. "Locksmith came early," I said. "Old keys won't work anymore." Her face fell, but she didn't argue, brushing past me with a muttered thanks. She didn't know the symbolism yet, but she would. I was locking her out of more than just the house. Ryan broke first. I saw it on X, a shaky video he posted, his face haggard, eyes bloodshot. "This is all lies," he croaked. "I'm not that guy. Please, stop." It backfired. Comments tore him apart, mocking his plea, digging up the photos, the blog posts, the reviews. His career was ash, his life a public wreck. I watched it loop on my phone, feeling a cold satisfaction. Emily hadn't seen it yet. She'd been upstairs all morning, pacing, her phone buzzing unanswered. I struck again. Using her laptop, left open in her haste, I forwarded the forum photos to her biggest clients, attaching a note. "Thought you should know who you're working with." I spoofed the email to look like it came from an anonymous whistleblower. Within hours, her inbox filled with replies. Shocked, curt, canceling projects. Her freelance career, her pride, began to crumble. She'd find out soon, and I'd be there to watch. She came downstairs at noon, hollow-eyed, clutching her scarf. "My clients are dropping me," she said, her voice small. Someone sent them pictures. She looked at me, searching for a reaction. I furrowed my brow, feigning confusion. Pictures? Of what? She hesitated, then shook her head. It's a mistake. I'll fix it. But her hands shook, and I knew she couldn't. That night, Paul called. He's gone, he said, triumphant. Skipped town. Left his crap behind. I thanked him, hung up, and checked Ryan's accounts, dark, deleted. He'd run, tail between his legs, leaving Emily to face the fallout alone. I poured 2 glasses of wine, handed her one. To better days, I toasted, meeting her eyes. She drank, oblivious to the final blow I'd already set in motion. Her confession came an hour later, tearful, halting. I've been seeing someone, she sobbed. It's over now, but I need you to know. I listened, nodded, let her spill it all. Ryan, the months of deceit, the love she swore was gone. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I took her hand, squeezed it gently. We'll work through it, I said, my voice calm. She didn't see the lie. She didn't know the real revenge was still coming. Emily's confession hung in the air like smoke, thick and choking. She sat across from me, tears streaking her face, waiting for my reaction. I gave her what she wanted, a nod, a soft "I forgive you," a hand on her shoulder. She clung to it, sobbing harder, thanking me for my kindness. I let her believe it, let her think we'd rebuild. Inside, I was a furnace, every word she'd said, every detail of her months with Ryan, fueling the fire. She thought this was the end. It was just the beginning. The next morning, I started quietly. I took her phone while she showered, cloned it to my laptop. Every text, every call, synced in real time. She'd deleted most of Ryan's messages, but not all. Fragments remained. Plans, promises, a life she'd dreamed of with him. I saved them, printed them, tucked them away. Evidence for later. Then I called her bank, posing as her with a voice modulator I'd bought online. Lost my card, I said, smooth as silk. They sent a replacement to my office, not our house. Step 1, control. She didn't notice anything off that day. I cooked breakfast, smiled, asked about her plans. I'm meeting a friend, she said, her voice steadier now that she thought the storm had passed. I knew the friend was a lie. Her phone pinged Ryan's old number, still active despite his disappearance. She was chasing ghosts, and I let her. I had bigger moves to make. I drove to my office, picked up her new card, and activated it. Her accounts were mine now. Every penny she'd earned, every dime she'd spent on him. That afternoon, I met a guy I'd found on a shady forum. Cash only, no questions. He was a wiry little man with a laptop and a smirk. You want chaos? He asked, cracking his knuckles. Total, I replied, handing him an envelope of bills. He took her clone data, emails, contacts, social media, and promised a digital reckoning. She'll wish she'd never logged in, he said. I didn't care how he did it. I just wanted her exposed, raw, helpless. When Emily got home, she looked lighter, like confessing had unburdened her. She kissed my cheek, murmured about starting fresh. I smiled, poured her wine, and watched her sip it, oblivious to the noose tightening around her. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in months, dreaming of her ruin. The wiry guy delivered. By morning, Emily's online life was a dumpster fire. Her email blasted every contact, clients, friends, family, with a confession I'd written. I've been living a lie. I betrayed my husband with Ryan Decker. Here's proof. Attached were the photos from Ryan's cloud, her texts, a timeline of their affair. Her social media mirrored it. Posts she couldn't delete because the hacker had locked her out. Her phone buzzed nonstop as replies poured in. Shock, disgust, silence from the people she'd cared about most. I was at the kitchen table, sipping coffee, when she stumbled downstairs, her face ashen. What's happening? She whispered, holding her phone like it was burning her. She showed me the screen, her mother's text. How could you? I frowned, feigning shock. Did you send this? I asked, my voice steady. She shook her head, frantic. No, I didn't. Someone's hacked me. She clawed at the device, trying to log in, but nothing worked. I stood, put an arm around her. We'll figure it out, I lied. Her freelance site went down next. Hacked, replaced with a looping video of her and Ryan laughing in his townhouse, a timestamp glowing in the corner. Her clients saw it. Her reputation was ash by noon. She called her best friend, sobbing, but the line went dead mid-sentence. Another bridge burned. I watched her pace, unraveling, while I checked her bank account on my laptop. I'd moved half her savings to a new account, one she couldn't touch. She didn't know yet, but she'd feel it soon. That night, she curled up on the couch, staring at nothing. Why is this happening? She murmured. I sat beside her, stroked her hair. Karma. Maybe, I said, soft enough to sound thoughtful. Her eyes flicked to mine, searching, but she didn't push. She was too broken to suspect me. I left her there, went upstairs and checked the hacker's latest update. Her credit cards were maxed out, bills unpaid, her digital identity a smoking ruin. Step 2, isolation. Before bed, I hid her car keys. She wouldn't notice until morning. Every move was a brick walling her in. She'd begged for forgiveness. I'd give her consequences instead. Emily woke up to a locked front door. Another security upgrade I'd scheduled overnight. Where are my keys? She asked, rattling the knob, her voice edged with panic. I shrugged, sipping my coffee. Must have misplaced them. I'll call the locksmith later. She didn't argue, too distracted by her phone, still buzzing with fallout. Her sister had emailed, cold and final, I need space from this. Her world was shrinking and I was the architect. I left for work, but I didn't go far. I parked 2 blocks away, watching the house through binoculars. She tried the back door, the windows, nothing budged. She sat on the porch, head in her hands, until a delivery guy dropped off a package. I'd ordered it. Unmarked, filled with printouts of her affair texts, photos, even a note. You thought you'd get away with it. She tore it open, froze, then ran inside, slamming the door. I smiled. Step 3, fear. Her bank called that afternoon. I'd rerouted her number to mine. Your account's overdrawn, the clerk said. Payments bounced. I thanked them, hung up, then drained the rest of her savings into a crypto wallet she'd never find. When I got home, she was on the phone with the bank, crying. It's gone, she said, looking at me like I could fix it. Everything's gone. I hugged her, murmured nonsense about identity theft. She clung to me, not knowing I'd stolen her lifeline. That night I cooked steak. Rare, bloody, the way she hated it. She didn't complain, just pushed it around her plate, her eyes distant. I don't know who's doing this, she whispered. Maybe Ryan's enemies, I suggested, watching her flinch at his name. She nodded, buying it. I poured her more wine, let her drink herself numb. Upstairs, I checked the tracker on her cloned phone. She'd texted him again, begging for answers. He didn't reply. He was gone and she was alone with me. Before sleep, I slipped a burner phone under her pillow, set to ping with a message at 3 a.m. You reap what you sow. She'd wake up terrified, and I'd be there, pretending to care. The burner phone worked. I heard her gasp at 3:04 a.m., fumbling in the dark. What's this? She muttered, her voice trembling as she read the message. I rolled over, groggy on purpose. What's wrong? She showed me the screen, her hands shaking. Someone left this, here in our bed. I sat up, took it, frowned. We need to call the police, I said, but she shook her head. No, they'll ask questions, I can't. She was trapped, and I knew why. Guilt, shame, the fear of exposure. I nodded, set the phone aside. We'll handle it ourselves, I promised. By morning, she was a wreck, pale, jumpy, checking the windows every hour. I left her like that, drove to a storage unit I'd rented, and unpacked my final tools. A box of her old journals, mementos from our early years, things she cherished. I shredded them, burned the scraps, recorded it all on my phone. Then I mailed her a USB drive. Blank except for that video, labeled Memories. She'd get it tomorrow, and it'd break her in a way nothing else could. Back home, she barely spoke. Her phone was dead, service cut. Another bill I'd forgotten to pay. She tried the laptop, but the hacker had locked that too. A looping error message. Betrayal has a price. She slammed it shut, tears streaming. I'm losing everything, she said, looking at me like I was her last anchor. I hugged her, whispered, I'm here. She didn't feel the knife I was twisting. That night, I staged the final act. I slipped out, drove to Ryan's abandoned townhouse, and left a note on the doorstep. Her handwriting, forged, I'll never forgive you for this. I tipped off Paul, knowing he'd find it, spread it, keep Ryan running. Emily would hear it eventually, think he'd turned on her too. I got home, climbed into bed beside her, and waited for the USB to arrive. She slept fitfully, muttering his name. I stared at the ceiling, counting down. One more day and she'd have nothing left. Not him, not me, not herself. The USB arrived at noon, slipped into our mailbox by a courier I'd paid extra to stay silent. Emily found it while I was at work, watching her through a hidden camera I'd installed in the living room. She plugged it into the TV, her hands trembling, and the video played, her journals tearing, her love letters to me curling in flames, her past reduced to ash. She sank to the floor, a guttural sob ripping out of her. I rewatched it later, savoring every second. When I got home, she was still there, the USB clutched in her fist. Look at this, she said, her voice raw. I played dumb, watched it with her, gasped at the right moments. Who would do this? I asked, pulling her close. She shook her head, broken. I don't know. I don't know anything anymore. I held her, let her cry, while inside I felt a quiet triumph. Her money, her career, her friends, her memories gone. Her lover, a fugitive. Me, her only tether, and even that was a lie. The next week, I pushed her over the edge. I found a letter, forged, slipped into her coat pocket, supposedly from Ryan. You ruined me. I hope you rot. She read it, collapsed, begged me to believe it wasn't true. He's lying, she said, clutching my shirt. I nodded, soothed her, but planted the seed. Maybe he's behind all this. Her eyes widened, doubt creeping in. She'd never know the truth, and that was the point. I moved out a month later, citing space to heal. I left her the house. Empty, locks changed again, bills unpaid. She had nothing to her name, no way to fight back. The last I heard, she'd sold her wedding ring to pay rent, living in a dingy apartment downtown. Ryan surfaced briefly on X, a shadow of himself, then vanished again. Paul sent me a beer emoji, his way of saying thanks. I sit in my new place now, a glass of whiskey in hand, the city lights sprawling below. I didn't end her life, I ended her world. She betrayed me in a way I'd never imagined, and I repaid her tenfold, slow and cruel, every detail a dagger. She'll never know it was me. That's the beauty of it. Revenge isn't loud or fast. It's a quiet undoing, a life unraveled thread by thread, until there's nothing left to hold.